From Adam to Noah, the Bible names 10 men in a row: Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech. 10 generations, one after another, running like a wall from the garden all the way to the ark. Every son gets a name. Not one daughter does, not a single one, in 10 generations. You can check that yourself right now. Genesis chapter 5. It takes about 2 minutes. The text mentions them, and he had other sons and daughters, over and over, like a formula stamped at the end of every generation. Present, counted, never named. And then, 1 chapter later, those same unnamed women become the reason heaven itself breaks open. I want to be honest with you. Most videos about Genesis 6 spend all their time on the angels. Who they were, why they fell, what they built. Almost nobody asks the other question: what happened to the women? Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand why the most important reversal in the whole Bible happens to a woman whose name we do know, and why that's not an accident. The formula that hides a person. Genesis 5 is doing something specific, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's a legal document, a record of inheritance. Adam lives, has a son, names him. The son becomes the next carrier of the line, and the chapter closes each entry with the same 4 words: sons and daughters. That phrase isn't nothing. In the culture writing this down, a daughter wasn't invisible. She mattered for marriage, for alliance, for the next household. But she mattered as a category, not as a person with her own line in the record. You get her existence, you don't get her story. So by the time you reach Genesis 6 verse 1, the pattern is set. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. Same formula, same anonymity. And then, verse 2, the sentence that breaks the pattern completely. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Here's the detail that gets skipped past almost every time. The Hebrew word for fair there is tov, good. It's the exact same word God uses in Genesis 1 over and over, looking at what he's made. And God saw that it was good. Now here are beings who were never supposed to leave their post, looking at the same creation with the same word. And instead of blessing it, they take it. That's not romance. In the Hebrew, took is the verb used for seizing, for capturing a city, for grabbing something that isn't offered. These women aren't given a line of dialogue, not one. They don't consent, they don't refuse, they don't get a name attached to a single one of these unions. The chapter that finally makes them the center of the story is the same chapter that erases them the hardest. Now, I told you at the top that you won't find a daughter's name in Genesis 5, and that's true. But I owe you a correction, because there is exactly one woman named between Eve and the flood, and where she shows up makes the whole thing stranger. Go back a chapter, to Genesis 4, the other genealogy, the one that runs through Cain instead of Seth. It lists Lamech, his 2 wives, and his sons. Jabal, who kept livestock. Jubal, the father of everyone who plays the harp and the pipe. Tubal-Cain, who worked bronze and iron. And then, tacked on to the end of that verse, almost as an afterthought, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. That's it. That's the whole appearance. One clause. No age, no children, no story, no reason given for why she's there at all. She does nothing in the text. She just gets a name. One woman named in 10 generations, and she's not in the godly line, she's in Cain's. The line the Bible has been telling you is going wrong. The line that just produced the first metal worker and a man boasting about killing someone. Ancient Jewish commentary got so restless about that stray clause that it started inventing explanations. Some traditions made her Noah's wife. Others turned her into something much darker. They were doing what people always do with a gap in a record. They filled it. But look at what the text itself actually does. The line that's being praised gets 10 named men and 0 named women. The line that's being condemned gets 1 named woman and then says nothing about her. That's not the exception to the pattern we're tracing. It's the sharpest example of it. A name is preserved for 4,000 years, attached to a real person, and everything that made her a person was thrown away. And it gets worse, because what happens to the rest of them isn't just silence. It's something closer to a cover-up. Fast forward a few verses. God has seen the corruption spreading across the earth, and he decides to send the flood. Genesis 6, verse 13. The end of all flesh has come before me. One family survives. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, their 3 wives. 8 people. Every other human being on the planet, including every one of those unnamed daughters of men, including whatever daughters they themselves had by then, is gone. Think about what that means for the story we're telling. The women who were taken, who never asked for any of this, don't get rescued. They don't get a warning of their own. They don't even get mentioned in the judgment. The text says God is grieved at his heart over what humanity has become, and then the flood comes for everyone equally, the beings who did the taking and the women who were taken. Same water, same silence afterward. And here's the part that should actually bother you more than the flood itself. Some of the oldest interpretive traditions outside the Bible. You'll find versions of this in later Jewish commentary. Don't read these women as victims at all. They read them as seductresses, as if the fault ran the other way. The daughters of men, already unnamed, already voiceless in the text, get blamed for what was done to them by beings a category above human. It's the oldest pattern there is. Someone gets hurt, and then someone gets blamed for being hurt. You don't have to go back 4,000 years to recognize that move. It shows up in ancient Near Eastern temple economies, where a woman's worth got measured in dowry and lineage, and almost never in her own name on a record. It shows up in Roman household law, where a daughter belonged first to her father's name, and then to her husband's, with no legal identity of her own in between. And it shows up, honestly, in how we still sometimes talk about who's responsible when someone with power takes something from someone without it. The daughters of men aren't a strange ancient footnote. They're the first instance of a pattern that keeps repeating. So if that's where the story starts, a woman erased before she's even hurt, then blamed after, you'd expect the Bible to just keep going that way. It doesn't. And the place it turns is not where you'd think to look. Before we get to the reversal, one more thing needs to be said, because it's easy to miss. Not every ancient Near Eastern culture erased women completely. Some did the exact opposite, and it lands in the same place. Picture a temple of Ishtar in Mesopotamia. Not the sanitized version, a stepped platform in the middle of a city, the biggest structure for miles, and inside it, a whole economy of women. Some were given to the temple as children by families who couldn't feed them. Some were dedicated by wealthy fathers as an offering. They had titles. There were ranks, classes, whole administrative categories of them, recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets that archaeologists have dug up by the thousands. Their work was sacred. Their bodies were understood as the meeting point between the human world and the divine one. And the fertility of the fields was supposed to depend on what happened there. Now go and read those tablets. You'll find the ranks. You'll find the rations, how much barley each class received, how much oil, how much wool. You'll find the temple's accounts balanced to the shekel. What you almost never find is a woman's own account of her own life. She's in the record constantly, and she's in it as a line item. So you get 2 ancient responses to the same problem, and they're really the same response, wearing different clothes. Either erase the woman entirely, like Genesis 5 does, or sacralize her completely, turn her into a symbol so large it swallows her name. One culture writes her out, the other writes her in as a function. Either way, you close the book, and you still don't know who she actually was. And that's the world the story we're tracing sits inside. Not a world that was uniquely cruel to women in some cartoonish way. A world where a woman was reliably a category, a daughter of somebody, a wife of somebody, a servant of a god, and almost never a name with a voice attached. Which is why what happens later, in a small town called Nazareth, is so strange if you're reading carefully. Let me set the scene properly, because familiarity has sanded all the edges off this one. Nazareth is nothing. It's a village of maybe a few hundred people in the hills of Galilee. So unimportant that it's never mentioned once in the entire Old Testament. Never mentioned by the historian Josephus. Never mentioned in the Talmud. Archaeologists working the site have found terraces, a few wine presses, storage pits cut into rock, farm country. And the girl in question is not a queen, not a priest's daughter, not anyone a chronicler would have written down. She's a teenager, betrothed, in a town with no record. If you wanted to pick the single human being in the ancient world, least likely to be named in a document, you'd pick her. And an angel walks into that house. Gabriel, one of the ones who kept his post. And if you saw our video on the 4 sentences, the same name that got handed the worst assignment in the book of Enoch. And watch the first thing he does. He doesn't take, he doesn't seize, he doesn't look. He speaks, and the first word out of his mouth is her name. Hail Mary. Not daughter of men, not a category, not a function, not a line item in a temple ledger. A name, said out loud, by heaven, to a girl in a village that history had no reason to remember. And then he does something that never once happens in Genesis 6. He explains. He tells her what's about to happen and why. And when she pushes back, how shall this be, seeing I know not a man? He doesn't overrule her. He answers the question. He engages it. There's a conversation on the page, back and forth, between an angel and a woman, in a text from a world that mostly didn't record what women said. And then Mary says the line that undoes 4,000 years of the pattern we've been tracing. Let it be to me according to your word. Her word, her yes, given, not taken. That single sentence is doing more theological work than almost any other line in the New Testament. And I don't think most people who've heard it 100 times have ever sat with why. The reversal, line by line. Let's put the 2 scenes side by side, because the contrast is the whole point. In Genesis, the sons of God see. In Luke, the angel is sent by God specifically to be seen, to announce himself, to explain. In Genesis, they take. In Luke, Gabriel asks, and more than that, the entire event depends on Mary's consent. Theologians have argued for centuries about how much hinges on that one line, let it be to me. But the shape of the story itself only works if she says yes freely. Heaven does not repeat what the watchers did. In Genesis, the women are fair, tov, desired for what they are on the surface. In Luke, Mary is called something completely different, highly favored, grace, not appearance. The angel doesn't mention what she looks like, not once, in either gospel account. What matters is what God has chosen to do through her, not what the sons of God saw in her. And in Genesis, not one woman gets named before the flood erases them all. In Luke, look at who surrounds this story. Mary, named. Elizabeth, named, and given her own prophetic outburst. Blessed art thou among women, spoken by another woman, to another woman, out loud, on the record. Later, Anna the prophetess, 84 years old, in the temple, recognized by name, speaking about the child to everyone who would listen. And I want you to actually look at those 3 women, because they're not decoration, and Luke did not have to include any of them. Elizabeth is old. The text says she and her husband are well stricken in years, and that she'd been barren her whole life, which in that culture wasn't a private sorrow, it was a public verdict on her. She'd carried it for decades. And when Mary, pregnant and unmarried and with everything to lose, walks into her house, Elizabeth is the first human being in the entire story to say out loud that something enormous is happening. Not a priest, not a scribe, an old woman in the hill country shouting. Then there's Anna. Luke gives her a paragraph, and it's an astonishing paragraph. He gives you her name, her father's name, her tribe, Asher, one of the tribes people had mostly stopped tracking, that she was married 7 years, widowed after that, and that she is now 84 years old and has essentially not left the temple in decades. She fasts, she prays. She's been waiting for something for most of a century, and when the infant is brought in, she's the one who recognizes him and starts telling everyone in earshot. Stop and compare that to Genesis 5. In Genesis 5, a man's tribe, his father, his age, and his years are recorded, and a woman gets 4 words, and daughters. In Luke 2, an 84-year-old widow gets her name, her father, her tribe, her marital history, her age, her practice, and her speech. That's the same genre of record, a genealogy, an accounting of who mattered. And the entry that was blank for 10 generations is suddenly full. 4 unnamed generations of daughters get wiped out by water. And then, at the exact hinge point where God moves to undo the corruption that started with them, the text goes out of its way to name 3 women in a row and let 2 of them speak in their own voice. That is not a coincidence, and it's not decoration. It's the reversal. The corruption started with women who were seen, taken, and erased. Redemption starts with a woman who is named, asked, and heard. But here's the piece that actually closes the whole thing, and it goes back further than Genesis 6. It goes back to the very moment the corruption entered the world in the first place. The promise that was always about a woman. Genesis 3, the garden. The serpent has just deceived Eve, the fruit has been eaten, and before any punishment is handed down, God speaks directly to the serpent, and inside that judgment is a promise. I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Read that again slowly. Not her husband's seed, not Adam's line, her seed, the woman's. In a culture where lineage ran through the father, where a son belonged to his father's house and his father's name, God plants, at the very first moment of the corruption, a promise that the undoing of it will run through a woman. So when you get to Genesis 6 and watch the daughters of men get taken and erased, you're not just watching a tragedy happen in isolation. You're watching the exact thing that promise said would be attacked. Of course the sons of God go after human women specifically. If the rescue was always going to come through a woman's seed, then corrupting, silencing, and erasing women is the most efficient way to try to make sure that promise never lands anywhere. And once you see that, you notice the bookend, and it's almost too neat to be accidental. Go back to the garden one more time. There's a woman there. A being from outside the human race approaches her. He speaks to her, and what he's actually doing is running a con, telling her something that isn't true to get something out of her. She listens, and she takes the fruit. Now go to Nazareth. There's a woman there. A being from outside the human race approaches her. He speaks to her, and what he's doing is telling her the truth, including the hard parts, and then waiting. She listens, and she gives her answer. Same setup. A woman, a visitor from outside, a proposal, a choice. In the garden, a lie is told, and something is taken. In Nazareth, the truth is told, and something is offered. The early church noticed this centuries ago and had a phrase for it, that the knot Eve tied, Mary untied. You don't have to be comfortable with everything that got built on that idea to see that the 2 scenes are deliberately shaped the same way, and that the second one is the first one run in reverse. And Genesis 6 sits in the middle of those 2 scenes, which is exactly why the Watchers went after women at all. It doesn't work. It never works. 4,000 years of daughters without names, and the line survives anyway, quietly, generation after generation, until a specific young woman in a specific small town gets a specific visit from a specific angel who calls her by name and asks for her yes. Paul writes about this directly, much later, in his letter to the Galatians. When the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman. Not made of dust, the way Adam was, made of a woman. The seed of the woman, exactly as promised in the garden, exactly as targeted in Genesis 6, finally arriving, through a woman who gets to say yes. What this actually means for you. I want to slow down here because it would be easy to leave this as an interesting pattern in old texts and miss what it's actually saying. If you've ever felt like your name doesn't carry weight, like you're a category to somebody instead of a person, present but never really seen, the Bible's own story tells you that this is exactly the wound the enemy goes after first. and exactly the wound God moves to heal first. The daughters of men weren't a footnote God forgot about. They were the opening move in a war, and the response to that opening move took 4,000 years to land, but it landed with a name, a question, and a yes. This isn't a story about ancient angels only. It's a story about whether you get treated as a category or as a person, and it's telling you which side of that God is actually on, not with a slogan, but with the way he wrote his own rescue plan. He didn't send the Messiah through a system. He sent him through a woman he addressed directly, by name, and then waited for her answer. And I don't think you have to squint very hard to see the old patterns still running. You are, right now, a set of categories to almost every system you interact with. An age bracket, a postal code, a household income band, a lookalike audience. There are companies that know an astonishing amount about you and have never once needed your name to use any of it. You're a profile, a segment, a number in a bucket. And the whole thing works better for them precisely because you're not a person in it. That's not a conspiracy. It's just how sorting at scale works. But it does something to you over time, and most people feel it before they can name it. The sense of being counted constantly and known by nobody. That's the exact wound in Genesis 5. Present, counted, never named. And the response to it in this story isn't a policy or a correction or an argument. It's an angel walking into a nothing village and saying one girl's name out loud before he says anything else. There's a line in Isaiah that God says to a whole people who felt written off. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. Not, I have counted you, called you by name. That's worth sitting with longer than most people give it. So here's where that leaves us. Genesis 5 names every son and hides every daughter. Genesis 6 takes those hidden daughters and turns them into the reason the world floods. And somewhere in between the fall and the flood, God has already promised that the fix is going to come through exactly the kind of person this corruption tried to erase. It takes 4,000 years, but it happens. A named woman, a real question, a real yes. And through that yes, everything the Watchers built starts coming apart. Because make no mistake, what they built didn't just vanish under the floodwater. Some of it survived, buried, waiting. And heaven didn't leave that unanswered either. There's a reason 4 specific angels get 4 specific assignments once the water recedes. And one of those assignments is still, according to the story's own internal logic, unfinished. That's next. If this is the first video of ours you've watched, subscribe. We go through the parts of the Bible most channels skip past, one mystery at a time. See you in the next one.